Hello, Shoyan here. This will be my seventh new build site. It's a modern house built to a high standard, well insulated and airtight, ranked well above last year's requirements. The carpentry work starts now and runs through summer, and it will wrap up around the time summer ends. That's the kind of schedule this job runs on. I'll start by setting the sill plates. Like I said, this is my seventh site. It's been about 5.5 years since I started this channel, so 7 houses in that time isn't much. I like to think I've been taking it seriously though. As always, I start with installing the sill. As they say, with anything, you start with a solid foundation and put in the groundwork. On top of that, the base matters most. That's why we set the sill. I think that saying actually comes from how buildings are made. Lay the foundation, set the sill, and the house goes on top. That's what a building is. First, I need to get the building square. Normally, the site supervisor sets the theodolite and marks the square lines, but not this time. So I measure the foundation in a few spots and work out an average line off that. Then I find square the old-fashioned way with the 3-4-5 method based on the Pythagorean theorem. I lay out that right angle on the longest run of the foundation. I'm marking out the lines in the late afternoon this time, since it looked like rain on the day I'd be setting them. Getting the lines snapped ahead of time means I can still set the sill even if it rains. That's why I'm working ahead of time. It's a new day and I'm setting the sill starting this morning. Luckily, it didn't rain. First, I set the anchor bolts up straight, checking them with a framing square. Cloudy days are actually easier for this work. On a sunny day, the shadows fall at an angle across the foundation, which can throw off how straight a bolt looks. It's much easier to see the bolts when it's cloudy. Next, I lay out the sill pieces. I can't set everyone directly on the foundation, so I place them by feel. I just spread them out across the site wherever they won't get in the way. I measure and mark the top edge of the seal where I'll drill the anchor bolt holes. Technically, the more accurate way is to mark the underside where it meets the foundation. But if I were to mark from the bottom, I'd have to flip the sills over and I could end up measuring from the wrong side by mistake. Given that, as long as the bolt itself is standing straight, it hardly matters whether you mark from the top or the bottom. For the holes, I use a 21mm auger bit for regular bolts and a 24mm bit for the thick hold-down bolts. I leave 5 to 6mm of clearance around the bolt. Today's flange nuts for the sills are made to sink in and sit flush, so the hole needs enough clearance for that. That's why I use a slightly larger bit. I keep the debris collected in one spot as I go. These days, foundations don't have vent openings. Instead, vent gaskets that let air through sit between the foundation and the sill. There are non-vented ones too. Since this house uses both foundation and floor insulation, I use the right type in each location.
完全にこれメンタやけど、あっちは本当やろ。
両方メンタじゃないとあかんのよな。
はい、分かったよ。こっちからしか行かん。
これがメンタじゃないとスタートせんと。
スタートせん。いや、こんだけあっても、これが一歩以下なんだな、話になる。困ったもんよ。
Now I set the sills. People describe this step differently, setting it, laying it, placing it. In the old days, once the sill sat exactly right, that alone told you everything was level and sized correctly. I remember feeling relieved once I saw the marks were right. These days, it's all pre-cut though, and the installation order gets a bit particular. When we used to mark the sills ourselves, we'd set things up so they could be joined from either direction. Pre-cut sills seem to have their own logic, just one starting point and one order. There's no flexibility to switch sides if something's awkward. I guess that's just how computers work. Now that the sills are set, I fit the floor beams that run in between. I attach the plastic posts to each beam first. I could do it afterward, but then I'd be driving screws up from underneath, which is a hassle, so I just put them on first. Once the long floor beams are in, I sight down the sill to make sure it's running straight, tightening the flange nuts as I go. I need to be careful at this stage because I sometimes find that the gasket has shifted out of place. Last, I add the 90 centimeter beam pieces in between. This kind of piece wasn't used in the old days. Instead of installing joists, we frame the beams into 90 centimeter grids like this and lay 24 millimeter structural plywood over the top, which works out well. This site has 3 porch columns standing outside, so I measure the height at the base of each. There's a real variety of column bases, like this trophy cup style. I set each one in position, then measure the height down from the top of the sill. Finally, some rain will get in no matter what, but I tape over the mortises to keep out as much as I can. And with that, the sills are set. Now I move on to the 3 porch columns. Based on the height of the trophy cup base I measured, I go back to the workshop and cut the columns to fit. It's not really practical to attach them on site. I fasten everything at the exact measured length, since using shims in between can cause problems later. I'm cutting the 3 columns and quite a bit of material gets cut away. Cutting this much makes me a little nervous.
この角が当たるんかな。こうやって入るんやん、ほら。
うん、麺やろ。
なあ。
This trophy cup base gives it a Western look. In the old days, you'd rarely see this kind of cup-shaped fitting. Back then, columns sat on trapezoidal stone bases called soban instead.
こんな硬い必要はないな。
This metal base takes the bolt from the side, which gives it more of a modern finish. I can't really say which method is better, but this one might actually resist rot better at the base. With a stone base, you always cut a tenon into the bottom of the column, and water tends to collect in the mortise carved into the stone. That's where it would rot, in places that get hit hard by rain. With this base, the end of the column steps down and sits raised one step up from the ground. There are weep holes too, so any water drains right out and the column shouldn't rot at the base.
こういうこっちゃ。で、こんだけうまいねって。
I work on the 4 pieces of exposed timber, the only ones on this site. They're quality local pine. Since the ceiling gets finished in cedar boards, I need to cut grooves where they meet first, or the fit won't come together cleanly. But if the ceiling is wallpapered, or if the timber meets a wall, I can just butt it up directly. It's an impressive piece of wood, though on 3 of them, only about 15 millimeters of it shows on the bottom. This piece I'm planing now goes right in the center of the double height space, and it'll be fully visible from all 4 sides. This local pine finishes up beautifully once I run a hand plane over it. I love the sheen, and honestly, the smell of the pine resin too. Now for the framing hardware. I slip a washer onto each piece, and for the Hagoita bolts especially, I add 2 washers with the bolt, then thread the nut back on. Actually, I end up taking it all off again when I bolt them on during framing. This house uses a lot of hardware for its size. Once the timber size passes a certain point, Hagoita bolts need 2 side by side instead of 1, so the quantity doubles. More hardware means a sturdier finished frame though. The exposed timber didn't make it in time with the rest of the delivery, so I ended up hauling it over myself. With that, the Sill installation is done. I've also finished cutting the timber ahead of time and prepping things like the column bases. Now everything's ready for framing, which starts tomorrow. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.